Hello and welcome to Studio Jake. I, of course, am your host, Jacob Airy. Thank you for tuning in. So, Super Tuesday happened. Yay. That means Joe Biden is even closer to clinching the nomination. Yay. For the Democrats, that is. President Trump pretty much has the Republicans locked up and has no real viable challengers. But I guess Biden got a little bit ahead on Super Tuesday. Good for him. He'll have a lot more hair sniffing to do. Anyway, be sure to like this video and share it out with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, again, like this video, but also subscribe to my channel and ring that little bell because YouTube does this weird thing where it curates your subscription feed, and it's kind of annoying because they don't show things in chronological order like they used to. So ring the bell, turn on all notifications. That way you get an alert right away if I post something. And it's the same on Facebook. Like this video, share it out. Like the Facebook page, follow it, and also be sure to turn on all notifications. I don't know why these social media companies, it's almost like they want to hide the fact that they have creators. It's very weird. Anyway, with all that in mind, sit back, relax, and welcome to Studio Jake. Most of you know that I am a trucker. Not Trekkie. Trekkie is what normies call Trekkers. Trekkers are Star Trek fans. I am a fan of all series, maybe except for the animated series. I haven't really watched enough of it. All the especially the original series and the Next Generation are in my opinion, I think both those shows are timeless. The other shows, they're up for debate, but they're not as good as those two shows. And the original series has this fan base, fans who sort of watched it while it was brand new. And Star Trek was something new when it first appeared. It was very rare. It was the first television show to use the word HE double hockey sticks in the context um, oh, what's I'm looking for, of a cuss word in on a broadcast. That was very rare, and it was also the first series to show an interracial kiss between Captain Kirk and his um, communications officer, which, by the way, I would just like to point out it was not a Me Too moment, although Captain Kirk would certainly be accused of this against Uhura or any SJWs who was watching, or any of his female crew. Actually, he was kind of a ladies' man, as most people who watch the show know. But in that context, he was actually being telepathically forced to kiss her. He didn't really want to, which I found. So actually, it was Me Too against him and her because they were both being forced by a third party. And it was a show of the 60s. It came out in 1966, 1967. That's when it premiered, having a total of, or I'm sorry, I said 67, I meant 69. It had a total of 3 seasons, 79 episodes. It was meant to be a 5-season show, but unfortunately, it never got that far. In fact, in the famous Space, the Final Frontier, these are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to seek out new life and new civilization, to boldly go where no one has gone before. It was originally, instead of its continuing mission, it originally said its 5-year mission. And they make a lot of references to 5-year missions throughout the Star Trek franchise. If you'll recall, in Star Trek Into Darkness, Chris Pine, who now plays Captain Kirk, he makes a reference to a 5-year mission. In Star Trek Discovery, when Captain Pike and the Enterprise returned, they were absent during the Klingon War, and Captain Pike, he speaks to one of the characters about how he thought about disobeying orders and returning from their 5-year mission because they were way out in deep space. So it was this is a common recurrence for ships, especially of the Enterprise nature. So I'm bringing all this to say that people might remember back in June 2019 that the William Shatner, who originally played Captain Kirk, and he did an amazing job. And Captain Kirk and William Shatner portraying him, they kind of get a lot of heat from normies who are like, "Oh, it was cheesy and all this." Okay, the show was written in the 70s, but in the 70s, it was ahead of its time. They made a lot of leaps with technology, and they kind of fudged with how they thought the 90s were going. In fact, the 90s was kind of a decadent period for the United States. We were only engaged in a few altercations, of course, being one of them being Black Hawk Down. It wasn't exactly a turbulent time. It did have some things, obviously, like the LA riots and the O.J. Simpson trial. But I mean, in the context, the 90s was mostly a peaceful time for America, but but in Star Trek they weren't. There was this whole eugenics war that happened where um, like these people who were product of eugenics rose to power, and in fact in Deep Space Nine they show that time period about how America has become a slum, and the Bell riots happen, which are during the eugenics. Which interesting though, Star Trek Voyager, they kind of went a different direction. So when they go to Los Angeles in the 90s, it looks like the regular 90s, and in fact people kind of poked fun at them because they were like, hey, what about the eugenics war? And now it's a time travel episode, so the creators of Voyager, I think, kind of just like pass it off of, oh well, the timeline was affected by all the time travel that was happening in that episode or something like that. So Star Trek definitely goes back and forth, and William Shatner, I think he did a great job as Captain Kirk. I like seeing him return in the films. I've seen all the films with his character as a star, and even Star Trek Generations. Gets a lot of heat from fans of the original series. They didn't like how Captain Kirk died. I disagreed. I thought that he had a very respectful death, that helping Captain Picard save the galaxy. I think that was a good thing. But anyway, I don't have time to wax philosophy, but I'm saying all this to say is back in, and sorry, I'm revisiting this, but I believe it was back in June 2019, Captain Kirk, William Shatner, said that he certainly would return to the role of the Starfleet commander. But this time it seems like he's changed his tune. So a fan asked him on Twitter, now that they have the series hashtag Picard, do you think they'll consider a series Kirk for you? That would be pretty cool. Shatner retweeted the question and answered, no. I think Kirk's story is pretty well played out at this point. And a lot of people are shocked by this. This comes, by the way, from Daily Star Trek News, which is an awesome fan site for Star Trek fans, by the way. They have a really great podcast called the Roddenberry Podcast. I highly recommend it. Sometimes they're not always great, but sometimes. But the I actually am not really surprised by this. I think if you're an actor who is active, and don't forget, William Shatner is 88 years old. He's no spring chicken. So he's probably back in June. There was a lot of talk about Star Trek projects, and maybe he thought that he would be able to pull one off. Now, he did not like how his character was killed off in Star Trek Generations, and in fact wrote a book about the Borg reviving Captain Kirk and using him as a tool to lure Starfleet into a trap. And I believe the Romulans were somehow involved. It was a very interesting. I might have even been a series of books, but I've never read them. My mother, who is a Trekker, she did, and she loved them. She thought William Shatner did a great job, though I'm sure he probably just came up with the idea and had a ghostwriter. I'm not sure how much of the actual like chapter writing he did. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I'm actually not surprised by this. I would love to see him return to the role, even if just a voice actor. That I know that CBS does these short treks where they show like short episodes. I would love to see him return in something like that or in an animated context. That would be fantastic. Um, One thing I do want to say, and I know I'll probably get slaughtered for this, is a lot of people remember Captain Kirk being this rogue sort of captain. And I just don't, if you watch the old series, you don't really get that sense. You get definitely he is a little bit of a rule bender, and he's definitely uh, more out of the box thinking than what you would see from a Starfleet captain, even in the context of all the other captains from all the other shows. He's definitely he's definitely more out of the box, but he is not this Han Solo character. He's again he is more of an adventurer, but if you watch the show, he is a dedicated Starfleet officer. And a lot of what people remember about Captain Kirk actually comes later, because don't forget, Captain Kirk was promoted to be an admiral, and I just don't see the way Starfleet is structured, at least how it's presented in all the shows, in the prequel shows, in the future shows, even in Discovery. Starfleet doesn't seem, while it does like out of the box thinking, it doesn't like rogue captains. In fact, in Voyager and in the Next Generation, there is disdain for captains who constantly just toss aside the the Starfleet playbook and the Prime Directive. They're like, there's a whole, I think there's a two-part episode of Voyager where Captain Janeway, now remember they're lost in the Delta Quadrant, they find another Starfleet vessel, and Janeway finds out that the captain is kidnapping aliens and doing like these brutal, inhumane experiments on them, and she like hunts him down. And Captain Janeway, if you watch the show, you remember now they're lost in the Delta Quadrant, and so sometimes she had to put aside the Prime Directive for survival means, but she never got to the point where she was inhumane and torturing aliens to get technology from them, basically. So and that's also true of Deep Space Nine, and uh, not as a big a deal as in Deep Space Nine. Captain Sisko was definitely a different sort of captain compared to other Starfleet commanders you see, but definitely in the Next Generation, there's an episode where a ship goes rogue and just starts blowing up enemy vessels. That now Starfleet is no longer at war with the species that he's attacking, but still it's not seen as something heroic. It's seen as, wow, we're disappointed in you. And Captain and I really think that a lot of what people remember about Kirk is really from the comic books, because in the comic books he did have like a flagrant disregard for the rules, and there's actually this whole episode or this whole issue I remember from, I can't remember if it was from the Marvel comics or not, but where the Enterprise is under repair, so Captain Kirk and the rest of the Enterprise crew, they're actually in command of the Excelsior, and they and he surrenders the Celsior to these two alien species, really though, because he thinks that because they're talking up a big game, we're going to blow you up and all this, and so he surrenders to them just kind of to get them to sign a deal with Starfleet in the end. But he still is worried that he's is going to get in trouble for surrendering the Excelsior to them. But anyway, neither here nor there. I really feel like Captain Kirk, despite being an out of the box adventurer, definitely a playboy, party boy, but as a captain, he was a dedicated Starfleet officer, an honorable one at that, who served Starfleet very well in the show's 5-year mission, and even in the films. He was a good captain and a good Starfleet officer, which is why he got promoted to admiral. So I think that, like I said, a lot of the misconceptions about Captain Kirk come from different media and not actually the show. I would love to see William Shatner return as the character. He is a fantastic captain, and he plays the part very well. So I'm a little disappointed, but not surprised. A lot of actors, when they get to a certain point, they're kind of like, okay, I'm done appearing in everything. And I actually hope that I get to meet William Shatner one day. He's never been at any of the conventions that I attend. And granted, I'm kind of a recent attendee to these conventions, but I would love to meet him. William Shatner, if by chance you listen to my little podcast here, I hope that I get the opportunity to meet you, not to interview you or anything. I would be satisfied with a handshake and a photograph. That is my whole take on William Shatner possibly returning to the role of Captain Kirk. Censorship. Most people who are on the left love it. Most people who are mainstream liberals and conservatives, plus libertarians, they are against it. Free speech should reign, and that also goes for the entertainment industry. We hate censorship of all kinds there, but I did actually think I did actually think that this story is kind of funny. So Spencer Pakuli, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Spencer, don't come after me, of boundingintocomics.com. He writes the story, Funimation censors mild butt pun joke and Nekopara. So Nekopara is an anime. I can't remember. Obviously it comes from Japan. I've never seen it, so I don't know a whole lot about it. But it's it's basically like a furry kind of anime. It's very reminiscent of Totally Spies, which was about a teenage group of spies who are high schoolers who are their cover is they're a band traveling the world, and it's very fetishy in that sort of way. And Nicoparo is very similar. Like I said, I don't watch it. I'm not a fan of the show, not a fan of the production. I do like anime, but I tend to like more action and science fiction based anime. Although I will admit I do like Fruits Basket, but it's more like of a I don't want to say urban fantasy because it doesn't really it takes place in urban Japan, but they don't really portray it as like big city life or whatever, but it's got fantasy elements to it and whatnot. But anyway, so so again, this is from Bounding into Comics. I'm just going to read you the article because I'm sorry I'm chuckling, but I just think it's so funny that people are making a big deal out of this. So, Funimation, anime production and distribution company, has altered a joke containing a mildly crude joke during their subbing and dubbing of an anime series, this time in their dub of Nekopara. So, Funimation has been accused of this before. They'll take an anime, and the broadcast standards in Japan are very different from America. And in fact, in most regions of Japan, they consider you adult when you're very young. I don't think that's right. So, for instance, in a lot of Japanese cities, the age of consent is 16. I think that's way too young. I think the age of consent in America is perfect, 18 years old. That's perfect. That's when you can be drafted into war. So that's perfect for the age of consent. But in Japan, it's not. It's obviously 2 years younger, and in some sectors, I've heard rumors that it's actually even younger. I hope that's not the case. But so anyway, their broadcast and their standards in that regard are very different than ours, and so they will put more vulgar jokes even in what is considered a kids cartoon. So just to give you a little bit of of what's what I'm looking for, just to give you a little bit of a foundation of what we're talking about. And Funimation has been accused of this before, of changing characters' names, of changing the wording, of cutting out certain scenes. They've been known to do this in the past, but it's to meet it's really to meet the broadcast standards for American, Canadian, and UK audiences. That's really why they're doing it. They're not really doing it because they're like, oh, we don't like how this happened or whatever. It's to me, trust me, if Funimation could get away with it, they would do all of these things with full non-censorship. So anyway, I'm going to read on. In episode 6, a sports competition is organized by Kashu Minaduki and Shugure Minaduki in order to resolve the growing tension of conflict between Azuki and Coconut. Now again, I don't watch the show, so I have no idea in the context who these characters are. One of the sports included in this challenge is a butt bumping challenge, in which respective opposing teams attempt to knock their opponent off of a platform into a pool of water using only their butt. During Vanilla and Coconut's matchup, Vanilla attempts to distract Coconut with a riddle. So, um, so they put what the word is, and I'll censor it a little bit because I don't want YouTube to come after me. But in the original Japanese script, the answer to the riddle was a play on words oshirari, which means acquaintance, and ashuri or oshuri, which is but, resulting in the pun ass acquaintances. So instead of acquaintances with which is ACQ, it's A then two S's Q. And it's meant to be a joke. It's not really meant to be sexual in any way, but they changed it, and so bounding in the comments notes. In Funimation's updated subtitles and dub, the answer is instead replaced with a similar, less crude pun of hipster. I actually, and in a lot of like really hardcore animes, especially ones that like the subtitles more than the dubs. I like the dubs. It's an animated show, so I like seeing it in my own language. Now, if the shows were live action, I don't like dubs of live action. I like subtitles for live action, but for animation, it distracts away from the animation because animation as an art form, you want to be able to watch it, and if you're stuck reading the screen the whole time, you don't really get a chance to do that. So I like dubs for animation. Now subtitles, it's a little bit different. I don't know why. It could just be how my brain works, but it's easier for me to focus and read the subtitles. Like for instance, with the South Korean film Parasite, than it is with animation. Like I said, I think it's because animation is as an art form, is you want to be able to watch how things work in design and whatnot. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So there's a lot of like backlash over this. Like I said, I don't think it was done to be malicious. I think that it was just meant to be a little tone it down a little bit for broadcast standards. I think that people freaking out of this are kind of just doing it more to show their I'm not a censorship person cred than anything. But I could be wrong. Let me know what you think in the comments below. That's all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at RealJacobAiry. Instagram is at RealJacobAiry. Parler is at RealJacobAiry. You can also find me on Facebook, author Jacob Airy. YouTube is StudioJake. Be sure to like my channel and subscribe to me there. And like I said before, don't forget to ring the little bell. You can also find my novel, The Seven Royals All Good Things. It's a high fantasy adventure. You can get it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com, and on booklocker.com, which purchase directly from my publisher. So that one actually helps me out a little bit more. Also, head over to my blog, jacobairy.blog, for more. I talk about even more topics. I do movie reviews. I talk about books I'm reading, and which is kind of weird because I'm an author, but I try not to review books anymore. Before I was an author, I used to review books. Now I just kind of share what I'm reading in the moment. I also talk about nerd stuff like comic books, graphic novels, television, film, all kinds of cool stuff. So definitely head over to jacobairy.blog and check that out. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time right here on Studio Jake.